In this video, we're going to go over the new R&D Tax Credit feature we've introduced in the Realtrac Performance ERP system. This feature is intended to help the owner and management team identify jobs that may be eligible for the United States Federal Research and Development Tax Credit, identify costs they believe are eligible, and prepare some reports that will help aid in the claiming of this tax credit. Going from your raw Realtrac data to a finished report to hand to your CPA can be done in a three-step process. We are first going to identify, then investigate, and then report. First, we need to identify some jobs. If we're looking back at jobs that already exist in our Realtrac system, we first begin to identify which jobs we think are good candidates. The first question I have in my mind is, which jobs had significant costs that I may wish to explore for eligibility for the R&D credit? Logging into my Realtrac system as an administrator, I have access to view all the costing information about both my open and closed jobs. So I'm going to use the Realtrac search interfaces and only look at jobs I've created in 2014. We've got a rough idea of some of the jobs that may or may not be good fits. Time for me to investigate. Using my knowledge of the IRS guidelines for the credits, I may or may not have to look closer at the job to determine if I believe it's eligible. I know for a fact this job 1325 is a good fit. It's the first time we've made this part, and we had to do some experimental work in order to get it production ready. I've settled upon tagging jobs with an R&D 2014 for those I believe are eligible for the 2014 credit, so I'm going to apply that tag now. Once I've tagged a few jobs, I now need to go in and examine which purchases I believe are eligible for the credit. When you purchase materials in the Realtrac system, information on those purchases is automatically added to the bill interface. We've created a secondary R&D bill interface. This is intended for an owner and management to project which bill purchases they believe can be applied towards the credit. Looking at the bill for job 1325, I've determined that $3,200 of my purchases associated with the job are appropriate. In addition to the purchases I made for the job, I wish to capture the time my project manager spent working on this job, so I will assign the number of hours the PM spent working on it and pick them from my employee list. Realtrac will use the employee's rate to automatically determine my SG&A associated with this job. After investigating a number of jobs, I'm ready to enter the reporting phase. I now pop over to our new R&D interface, and I can dive deeper into the expenses associated with these jobs. Within the R&D interface, I am going to filter down and only examine jobs I've tagged with my R&D 2014 tag. Now I wish to examine the labor and workstation costs that have occurred during my company's fiscal year. I set the window for the fiscal year and hit my Calculate R&D column button. This button will cause Realtrac to examine every work session that was logged against each one of these jobs, calculating the labor and workstation costs associated with the session. If the session occurred outside the window of our fiscal tax year, then that session is excluded from my costs. You'll note that we're showing our R&D costs, the SG&A costs associated with the R&D activities, along with my newly calculated labor and workstation costs for the year. At this point in time, I could run a report for this data, or I may need to further examine some of these jobs. I may be ready to hand off my report to the CPA, or I may have to dig deeper. Either way, the new interfaces have helped me organize my data, and our new administrative tool has made this process much easier for me to claim my credit.